We're back.
Yeah, we are.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Dude, we're just hopping right back into Genesis.
We are. We have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, so we're in the second part of Genesis 14, and we're going to be talking a lot about Melchizedek.
Yeah.
So we're going to do one episode about the second part of Genesis 14, and then we're going to do 2 other episodes talking about, because Melchizedek is like, he only shows up in 3 places in the entire Bible. But he's actually a really important character, but they don't even talk about him a lot. And so he shows up in Genesis, in the story we're about to read.
Psalms?
He shows up in the Psalms as well. Yeah, shows up in Psalm 110.
Hebrews?
And Hebrews, yeah.
Ew.
Look at you go, man. So he shows up in those 3 places. He's actually talked about more in the New Testament in Hebrews than he is in the Hebrew Bible.
Really?
Yeah, super interesting.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so he's kind of a mysterious character, but we'll just get to talk about him and see if we can figure him out just a little bit. I don't think we're supposed to figure him out fully, but it will be interesting to kind of meditate on this person and the metaphor that he is. Yeah. So,
well, that's the real kicker, Brett. You can't really figure out anyone fully. So
that's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
So,
it's gonna be good though. I think it's gonna be really exciting.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. So
it seems meaty.
Oh, very meaty.
It's gonna be thick.
Very meaty. Yeah.
It's like a lamb shawarma with extra pita.
With extra pita. I don't know if the extra pita makes it the meaty part.
Dang, you got me there.
But I guess it makes it a very filling meal with extra pita.
It's gonna be 1 pita with extra lamb.
We really took this and ran with it.
Yeah, we tried.
So yeah, we tried. Anyway, so yeah, we're looking at, it's Genesis 14 verses 17 through 24.
Should we just start off by reading through it?
Yeah, well, I'd like to actually take it kind of section by section. Okay. And we'll just kind of slowly churn through this thing.
I like that, like ice cream.
Yeah.
Breyers, sponsored.
Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor.
So it starts off in the beginning, and this is coming off of talking about in our last episode, this war between these 4 kings and some other kings, and good kings, bad kings, but mostly just a war full of different nations coming together. And these kings, none of them are really that great. And out of this war, we see Lot ends up getting taken, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, the nephew Lot back at it again, right? And so he ends up getting taken, and then Abraham comes in with this small army and ends up just clearing house, totally clearing house against all these kings. And this is kind of the start of this theme of these God using small amounts of people to take out a lot of people. Like we see this with Gideon, for example, right?
I was thinking Jericho too, right?
Yeah, well, it kind of shows up a lot with a lot of the conquests that Israel goes through, right?
Yeah.
Where they start with, they don't really have a lot of people, but they go through all these different military actions in really odd ways. Yeah. And the whole point is to get the Israelites to ultimately not try and trust themselves, right, and their abilities. Yeah. But it's ultimately to get them to trust in God, right? And so they're going to do things like walk around a wall,
with trumpets.
Or they're going to bang pots and pans in an enemy's camp, or they're going to go in and with 300 men against thousands and somehow win. All these different things where you're like, how are they doing this? And the whole point is for the reader to be asking, how are they doing this? And for the Israelites to be asking, how are we doing this? Right? And there's even that story of how, Moses, people had to hold up his arms because the arms...
For a staff, right?
Well, if his arms stayed up, then Joshua and the troops would be winning. Yeah. But right when he lowered his arms, the troops started losing. And so he had to keep them up, and he actually had to get 2 of his buddies to hold up his arms.
It was Aaron and...
I don't remember who it was. I think it was Aaron and one other person, yeah.
I don't remember the other guy.
But just weird military things. So this, anyway, Genesis 14, it kind of starts that theme.
Okay. This would be the first instance.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Where there's just like, you think, how does this happen militarily? And it does happen because of Yahweh.
Do you think, since this kind of is an introduction to maybe a theme, is there anything particularly different about this being the first time? I don't know. I'm thinking of like creation account of, I don't know how you kind of just see this reoccurring pattern start.
Sure.
Does that make any sense?
In a sense, I think they're mostly just trying to get you to start asking this question on how did Abraham do that?
Okay.
And that's, I think, what they're more just trying to get the focus on, is to get you to ask why, how, all those questions, because they want you to ultimately focus towards Yahweh as the ultimate winner of any war. So
nice.
Yeah. So that's kind of the Genesis 14, the first part. And so after that, we don't know exactly how long it was after it, but we see that it's basically after his return and he defeated these kings. He gets greeted by this guy named the king of Sodom. He was in this battle.
Okay. And
Sodom, I don't know if you remember, Sodom, basically the word Sodom means burning, which, is a great start, great introduction.
Foreshadow.
Yeah. And so if we go back to Genesis 13, verse 13, it gives you like a little author's note about Sodom. And it says that now the men of Sodom were wicked. They were great sinners against the Lord. And so you're like, oh no, this wicked king is going up to Abraham. Like, what is going to happen?
Yeah.
What's he going to do? And so he goes up and he meets him at the valley of Shavah, and that is the King's Valley. And so a lot of people think, this is another little author's note about the King's Valley, that this was an area that was in proximity to Jerusalem, like somewhere around there, somewhere pretty close. Mm-hmm. And so the king of Sodom shows up, and then it's almost, he kind of like steps in the background for a little bit, because then it says, this is verse 18, and then Melchizedek, king of Salem, comes onto the scene. And he brought out bread and wine. And so now we have this king, Melchizedek, and he shows up, and now it's like, king of Sodom, kind of step back. Melchizedek is coming to the scene. And he kind of comes in pretty mysteriously. Like, we never see anything about him before. We don't really see anything about him after. And, especially Genesis, but the Old Testament's really clued in on things like genealogies, and we don't really see a genealogy for Melchizedek. And so he just kind of is this mysterious character that shows up, and it says he was a priest of God Most High. Like, oh, okay. So,
and that's all in caps too, God Most High. Well, not all, but at least in my translation, ESV.
Oh, interesting.
At least the G, the M, and the H.
Yeah.
So it's probably referring to Yahweh.
Yeah, so we'll actually talk about that because there's two different theories. I think it's pretty confirmed that he's talking about Yahweh. Yeah. And we think that, especially as Abraham like almost reaffirms that it's Yahweh. Yeah. Later in the passage, but there's one other theory that's kind of interesting that we'll talk about. Just for kicks and giggles, why not?
All right.
So Melchizedek, his name is basically a mixture of the Hebrew words Malachi, which means king, and Tzedekah, or Tzedek, which means righteousness. And so his name means king of righteousness, or righteous king, which is a great name, right?
Makes sense why he was a priest.
Yeah, right? So righteous king, or the king of righteousness, comes out. And it says not only is he a king of righteousness, he's the king of Salem. Salem is the ancient name for Jerusalem.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Melchizedek, he is the king of righteousness, and he's the king of Salem, or Jerusalem, and Salem means peace. So he's king of righteousness, king of peace, and he comes from what would be Jerusalem. Yeah. Yeah, and so he just...
That's really odd how it's just such a mysterious drop.
Yeah, right? And he comes from the area that that God actually promises to Abraham. And so he just mysteriously kind of comes into the scene. And it's like, this is actually a really important guy, right? He's a king of righteousness, and he's the king of Jerusalem.
I'm just trying to think. Obviously we don't know, but where would his family tree stem from?
Yeah, who knows? And I don't think the authors clearly are not intending to get you to really think about it, because they don't even mention it.
Yeah.
And in the book of Hebrews, the author talks a little bit about sort of waiting in the mystery of that. And so we'll talk about that when we get in that sort of bonus episode. But yeah, super, super weird.
Wow.
He just shows up. And so this word Salem, it also, this title for Jerusalem, it only shows up in 2 places in the Hebrew Bible.
Salem specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It shows up here.
Okay.
And then in Psalm 76, where it says, "In Judah, God is known. His name is great in Israel. His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion." So it kind of clues us into this reality that Melchizedek is from a place where Yahweh has established his abode, where Yahweh has established his dwelling place, which is really interesting, and it kind of confirms that Melchizedek is actually not just this kind of random person that comes in, but he's actually this really important character that comes from where God is residing. But he's still really mysterious. And so it says as well that he is a priest of God Most High. So this is the first time that a priest shows up in the Hebrew Bible. This is the first time. You know, we've been talking since Genesis 1. Yeah. This is the first time that a priest shows up, and priests are super important. Yeah. In the grander biblical theme, like super, super important. Yeah. And so for him to be the first one is something that really should be taken into consideration as we're thinking and meditating on who this person is.
So here's an odd question.
Okay.
This might be really deep church history. So,
oh boy,
please pardon me if you don't know.
That's clearly my strong suit, so we'll see.
Well, I'm just thinking of like the term priest. If this is the introduction of a priest figure, is this something that the average Hebrew reader would have spent much time thinking about? During the time. So. They're like, oh wow, this is so weird. Like here's our first priest.
Yeah, I definitely think so, right? Because there's the whole Levitical priesthood that shows up in Exodus and moving forward, right? And this high priest role is something that is super important all throughout Judaic history.
I guess it's kind of just weird to think about, like, how did they have the definition for a priest before they had priests in the Bible or in the Torah?
Yeah. Well, and it's cool too, because this was almost like this is another author's note, right? Yeah. Where the author's saying he's looking back at Melchizedek and seeing him, who he was and what he did, and he's saying that he was a priest of God Most High.
So that was kind of defined after the fact.
Yeah, because I think they already had when these writers are looking back and writing down this story, they already had a full template for what a priest is, right? Because they talked about that in the Mosaic Law. And so when they look at how Melchizedek acted and what he did, they saw he was a priest. He acted exactly like a priest. We'll see what he does.
That's cool.
But yeah, they definitely had a framework for what priests were. Definitely. And I know in a more like non-denominational context, we don't have any priests. Yeah. But
we got pastors though.
Yes, we do. And
deacons.
Pastors, deacons, and elders, and all that, and everything.
Yeah.
So it's definitely really interesting.
Good call. I probably would have passed right over that. I think I have passed right over that.
And we'll talk a lot about, because Melchizedek, it's interesting. He's a king and a priest, and so that'll be a thing that when we go to our Hebrews podcast, we'll talk a lot about.
That also kind of sounds like an odd combination.
Yeah,
I think of Jesus, prophet.
You should.
Priest.
King. That's what that's what the Hebrews author wants you to think about is, that sounds like Jesus. Because they actually do that. They make a comparison between Jesus and Melchizedek. We'll get all into that.
Wow, that's
Let's see if we can stay grounded here.
We don't want to hop too far ahead. Stay tuned.
So we're going to talk about God Most High specifically when we get towards the blessing section. Okay. Because Melchizedek gives a blessing to Abraham. Okay. But essentially, priest, it's the word kohen, and it basically the role of the priest was to to be an advocate for man to God, and be an advocate for God to man. Sort of like a prophet, but they also focus a lot more on cleansing the sins of the people, right? They would do the sacrifices every Passover for that. And so that was a lot of their role. And so, and so that was essentially very, 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 very briefly the priest portion of Melchizedek. But we'll get way more into it. So
we got our crash course.
Yes, definitely.
I think that's good starting. We got our training wheels.
Yeah. So let's sort of get into this blessing. This blessing is really interesting. And so it says this. This is Melchizedek blessing Abraham. And he says this: "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Yeah, so blessed be Abram by God Most High. So this means that Melchizedek is actually blessing Abram through God, almost, through God Most High.
Which is also interesting because Abram has already been directly blessed by God. Or
totally.
has that happened? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Back in Genesis 12, right?
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
I lose track of the timeline sometimes.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, so this is almost Melchizedek reaffirming what Yahweh has already done.
We need that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's supposed to be one of the focuses of this, is that Abram gets continually blessed and reminded of this blessing many times, because that's one of the things Yahweh does, is he continues to remind. And so he'll do it himself, and he'll use people to do that as well. He'll use a priest.
Wow.
And so
why?
Yeah.
This is so weird. I feel like all my life I always thought like Melchizedek was like a bad person.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he is a Canaanite king.
Huh.
And so you're supposed to come into it almost with the reality, like, Melchizedek is a Canaanite king, and usually the Canaanites are not very good.
You have your walls up.
But this one is really good.
Huh.
Like, if he is blessing Abraham, that means that he is actually superior to Abraham, because a superior blesses an inferior.
Yeah.
It doesn't go the other way.
Yeah.
And so this text is implying that that Melchizedek is actually superior to Abraham.
Whoa.
Which means that he's a really, really important, a big deal, even though he shows up very mysteriously and just kind of leaves.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, super nuts. So there's two theories about this blessing.
Okay.
That are both very kind of opposite, but they both give us an interesting conclusion about who this guy really is.
I kind of want to guess, but I feel like I'll be way off.
So the first one is that God Most High is just another title for Yahweh.
Okay.
Right? It's just another traditional title for Yahweh. This is probably the most widely accepted theory, I would say. And this is the one that I think we're really going to run with mostly, because it just makes a lot of sense.
Well, it makes the most sense too. Like,
yeah,
if there was another God, hypothetically, to have the title God Most High, then that would kind of circumvent Yahweh, God.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it is interesting. And so a few things. You notice the capital letters, right? Capital letters, especially in the Hebrew Bible, they are given to Yahweh, and most of the time they're not given to other gods of other nations.
Yeah.
Another thing, we see that Abram reaffirms what he said, reaffirms God Most High by ascribing it to Yahweh. He says specifically in verse 22, he says, Lord God Most High. And so he keeps the God Most High title, but he adds in the Lord portion in the beginning, which...
all caps.
Yeah, which really pinpoints it and connects it to Yahweh specifically.
Yeah.
And so that happens. Also, Yahweh, or Yahweh's title of God Most High, it shows up a lot in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel uses the phrase God Most High a lot. Uses it at least 10 times. And so we can see that this is not the only place where we see this. And also in Luke 1, going to the New Testament, when the angel comes to Mary and tells her that she will have a son, and the angel says the son will be named Jesus, this angel also says that he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. So this title of God Most High is pretty, it's not like the most widely used term for Yahweh, but it is still a very, a term that was used frequently enough to where you can really ascribe it to Yahweh fairly easily.
I could see why people would want to go with that one.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Keeping in Genesis 14 in the second half, but also just looking broader, it makes a lot of sense. But there's this other theory.
I kind of want to hear this crazy.
So this is essentially the like Canaanite God theory, right? Because you have to take into account Melchizedek is a Canaanite king.
Yep.
And so the Hebrew for God Most High is El Elyon.
I feel like I've heard that before.
You may have. El is like the term used for like general gods.
Oh yeah, okay.
So it's kind of like gods? Elohim, right? You know Elohim?
Yeah.
A spiritual being, the El in the beginning.
Okay, yeah.
It's like a term used for like just God in general.
So El Elyon?
El Elyon.
El Elyon.
And so the Elyon is the most high portion.
Okay. God of gods, kind of, is what it sounds like.
Sort of. Yeah. So it's just the highest God.
Okay.
And so this could also refer, this was some phrasing that could have been used for the high God of the Canaanite pantheon.
Okay, what's a pantheon?
Just the collection of gods.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is this like Hindu type stuff or?
No, right? Because other nations, the other nations around the Israelites had all kinds of different gods. They were very polytheistic. Yeah. And so
I'm just trying to remember like what those gods would have been
in the same way that like the Greeks and the Romans had their Zeus. Greek pantheon. Yeah. It's that same sort of deal. Okay. And so
are there any examples of like what those gods were specifically in this time frame, or just the general idea of
there would be like a god of fertility, there would be like a god of
well-being.
Yeah, like the same thing that we kind of see throughout like different cultures. Yeah. And so it would have been similar probably to that. Okay. But essentially
Canaanite god.
Yes. Pantheon. And this was like the most, so this would be like the Zeus equivalent to the Canaanite version of Zeus, maybe.
Interesting.
And so this is like the high god. And so
he shoots ice bolts instead of lightning. Just kidding. I don't know.
Whatever.
I just made that up.
So this god was the one that was worshipped in Salem, right, in Jerusalem. Okay. And this name for it is fairly vague. Okay. Because it's just sort of like the highest god. Yeah. And that's really it. And that's really all that they ascribed to this God. And so Abram in verse 22, he reaffirms that God Most High is Yahweh. Yeah. Right. And so there's almost this sort of interesting thing where it's trying to show that they're both talking about the same God. They're both talking about Yahweh. But the whole thing is that Melchizedek and the Canaanites in their area that he was ruling over, they were worshiping Yahweh, but they didn't necessarily know his name. So their high God, their highest God, it's a little interesting, right? Their highest God, let me just put a bow on this. Their highest God was the God over Jerusalem, over the land that God had promised, over the promised land. And so God was over this land, and the Canaanites actually ended up worshiping Yahweh, but they didn't know his name. And so when Abram reaffirmed it, he reaffirmed that this God was Yahweh, which means that they were both worshiping Yahweh. Yeah. Abram knew his name, but Melchizedek didn't. So that's the other theory.
That's cool.
It's interesting.
I think that's an interesting theory. It kind of set off a flag, and I'll be quick about this in my head. I thought of two things. It's maybe like you meeting someone from an entirely different continent, and you guys are both Christians. Yeah. But like you have no idea how they became a Christian. But then also like maybe it's an instance where you run into someone at a coffee shop, and then like you both start talking about Jesus, but then like you're kind of being like, are they talking about like the Jesus, like Jesus, or are they talking about like their version of Jesus? So there's almost like this kind of testing of like, I don't know, I just see like Abram saying, how he's reaffirming like, you mean like Yahweh, the Lord Most High, rather than just like the God of like gods. He's adding that Yahweh aspect into it.
Yeah, well, it almost seems like that's sort of the case, but also that Abram just knows that he's talking about Yahweh.
Yeah, it should be the Spirit.
Yeah, right. And I think it also just could reaffirm the first theory, which is the more widely accepted one, that Melchizedek came in and Abram knew that he was a priest for Yahweh. And that even though it's kind of muddy on how he got that and really who he is in general, that Abram knew that he was a priest of Yahweh.
He didn't know Yahweh, but he knew Yahweh.
Or he did know Yahweh.
Because
in the second theory, it was he didn't know Yahweh. And he's just using this general title. But in the first theory, which makes more sense, and the one we're really going to run with, is the fact that Melchizedek fully knew who Yahweh was, and he just used the title of God Most High. Yeah. The same way that they did that in the book of Daniel, and the same way that they did that in Luke, and the same way they did that in a bunch of other places.
I'd say that makes more sense.
Yeah. So that's the one we're really going to run with.
Yeah.
And so, we'll just keep going through this.
Wow, that's cool.
So that's essentially what we get with the blessing. Right, we see that Melchizedek is blessing Abram, and he's blessing him from a priestly perspective of blessing him through Yahweh in a sense, right? And so he says, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High." So he's taking that priestly role, and this is continuing this blessing that Abram gets a lot, especially in Genesis 12, where he receives this blessing, and God wants to reaffirm this blessing to him, even though Abram messes up. But Abram's on this upward trajectory right now.
Yeah.
Right? Because he went in, he trusted God, and he fought this war. And before that, he
let Lot pick where he wanted to go first.
Yeah, right? And so he's on this upward trajectory. In the next chapter, in chapter 15, it's God's covenant with Abram, which is like the peak, the climax of Abram. And then we're going to see, I'll kind of go back down. Yeah. But for now, let's stay in the fact, we're in the upward trajectory. Yeah. And so he's being blessed because God wants to affirm this blessing, right?
Yeah.
So after this blessing, we see this really interesting thing where the second part of Genesis 14, verse 20 says, "And Abram gave him a tenth of everything." A tenth of everything.
Tithing.
Yeah. So this is the first thing that we see with tithing. We see it in the Levitical priesthood that one of the things that God calls the Israelites to do is to tithe to their priests. Yeah. To tithe to the Levitical priesthood. And so this is sort of the start of that sort of theme.
And tithing is, just for clarification, almost
just means
always
10%.
10%. Yeah.
Yeah. So he gave him a tenth of everything he had.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the start of that, which means that, and it almost continues this sort of theme, right, for Melchizedek being a priest, right? We see that he blesses, he receives a tithe, and we skipped over this part. He brings out the bread and wine.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which is kind of like a covenantal meal, but it was two of the things that were part of the Passover, which was a big thing, right? We don't see bread and wine show up together very often.
Yeah,
even this phrase specifically shows up only a handful of times in the Hebrew Bible.
Well, that was another thing. I think I just generally get lost in the time frame of all of this. Of Passover too. Like, we haven't really found out what Passover is yet.
No.
No,
that's a whole that's like
in
50,
Exodus,
50
right?
chapters from now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's just really interesting to see, specifically bread and wine, because that's
Yeah.
also the elements of communion nowadays.
Yeah.
And communion, it comes from the Passover that Jesus had with his
totally.
disciples. So it's really interesting to see such a mystery figure, I guess you could say, in Melchizedek, doing a lot of these priestly things.
And doing things that were pretty mysterious. Like he brought up bread and wine as to continue this priestly thing, but in Genesis, bread and wine, that theme has not really been reinforced yet.
Yeah.
And so he almost comes in and just gives a whole bunch of Easter eggs for
Yeah.
what will happen in the story.
Yeah.
And you're just sort of left to be like, who was that guy? And he leaves. And then you'll just sort of figure out more as you read the story. And you're like, oh, well, okay. Maybe has some connection to Melchizedek. I don't know.
Definitely seems like an anchor point, this Melchizedek guy.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
So that was sort of the section about Melchizedek.
Yeah.
And what we'll see is that that's really all that we see in this story.
Really?
Melchizedek, he comes in, he's got some bread and wine, and he blesses Abram. Abram gives a tenth of everything he has, and then he's out.
That's so
Like,
odd.
That's it?
Wow.
Yeah, right?
That's so odd.
And he doesn't show up again until the Psalms.
Wow. And that's
Psalm 110.
King David, supposedly.
Yeah, I don't know if he wrote that one specifically.
I don't know either. We'll have to ask him later.
Yeah. But he doesn't show up in a narrative anymore. Like he doesn't show up in any other narrative, in any other story. He only gets taught about, he gets talked about in a poem and in a teaching. And that's it. Wow. It's so mysterious and so weird, right?
That's so strange.
But he's elevated to such a high importance.
Mm-hmm.
And rarely does this happen in the biblical story, where someone just sort of comes in.
A random person
Comes in who's a priest of God Most High. So a very important person comes in with no anchor points of like, he was the son of this person, which they do all the time. Even if they bring in someone like sort of randomly, they'll give him some sort of anchor point of saying like, he was the son of this person or the father of this person.
Yeah.
But he really doesn't get much. And then he leaves.
Yeah. I don't want there to be any comparison here, but I'd say like the only other time where you kind of have like random people dropped in the storylines, I think would be like angelic figures. Of delivering a messenger or delivering of some sort of news.
Well, there are some people who have theories that Melchizedek is not just a human, that he's actually some either angelic figure or Jesus himself. People have all kinds of, yeah. If you just go on Google and look up,
dude, that's a dangerous place. Like Google.
No, it is, and I'm not saying that that's correct.
But I mean, if you were to,
but it is interesting, right? And, and the text leaves it ambiguous enough to where it leaves some sort of desire for searching and trying to create more context for it. I'm not saying that theory is like super backed and true.
We are not saying that.
Yeah, let me back that up again and say it. But
Google said this. Yeah. We're just reading Google.
But you can Google, and people have articles, and people have whole studies on the fact that Melchizedek may be like a pre-Jesus kind of thing. But
I think the best place to probably leave it is just the how interesting it is, the lack of context of it.
And that's what the Hebrew authors want you to do, is they want you to be like, who was that? And then he just sort of leaves. They want you to keep him kind of mysterious. Because if they wanted to give you more, they would have given you more.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly the most sort of grounded way to read it. Yeah. Is just the fact that we don't really get much more. And remember, this is meditation literature. This literature was chewed on before it even was made like official for many, many years, thousands, hundreds of years. And so it took many, many years to write and put together. That's not like they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, we forgot to put the genealogy from Melchizedek. Oh, dang it.
Got to go back to copyright.
Yeah.
Wait, that's not it. Is it copyright?
I have no clue.
I'm not a writer.
Yeah, no. But yeah, so that's essentially Melchizedek for now.
So cool.
Yeah.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. And so the story's not over that yet, though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Because remember, there's the person in the background. There's a person in the shadows, and that's the king of Sodom. Right? Remember, because he showed up, and they're like, the king of Sodom's here in the valley of Shoah. And then we have Melchizedek, and that was
He's like, yeah, don't worry about
like,
him.
what happened to the king of Sodom though? Well, now he's back. Okay, so it's almost like Melchizedek. He came, he blessed, and then he stepped back. Maybe he just left.
And where is this at too in Genesis 14?
This is Genesis 14, verse 21.
Okay.
It says, "And the king of Sodom said to Abram, 'Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself.'" And so Sodom is saying, okay, well, you got some stuff by right as you defeated all these armies, you probably gained some stuff. You did. And so you can keep the people that you gained, but give me all the stuff that you gained.
No, you had that backwards. Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
I got you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, okay. So, yeah. So this is what the king of Sodom is saying. But he's saying, take the goods for yourself. And so the king of Sodom is saying, the stuff that I got, and maybe you gain some stuff too, but the stuff that I got, I'll give you the stuff.
Sodom's a wicked place, though. Why would he want the persons?
Well, I don't know. But yeah, so they're almost trying to like divvy up their earnings from the war or whatnot.
Yeah.
But it comes to this place where Abram either can be indebted to the king of Sodom or not. And if he's indebted, he gets stuff, which is good for him. But if he's not indebted, then he doesn't get anything. But he's also not associated with Sodom.
Yeah.
Which is probably a good thing. And we'll see that this way. That's the choice he ends up taking.
Yeah, stay away.
Yeah, stay away. But one of the things that's interesting is we bring up this taking for yourself thing again.
Oh, I feel like I've heard this before.
Yeah, which is I think one of those phrases that we're sort of really sitting with is that someone, when they take something for themselves, it often doesn't really end that well, right? But that when they take something on God's timing, and when God ultimately, not even with them taking it, but when God ultimately gives it, right? Right, when they took the fruit for themselves, that was really their error. God wanted to give them wisdom, right? God wants to give, but it's on his timing, and it's not on our timing.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, what we need to see here is that this is another one of those moments where Abram could have had the chance to take something for himself.
Yeah.
He gets another little test here.
He's still on that upward trajectory, though, so he doesn't want to mess up.
Yeah, well, right before he gave 10% of what he got. And so we see here that Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High," right? And so
Confirmation
this
again.
is confirming that the person that Melchizedek was talking about was Yahweh, the possessor of heaven and earth. So it's almost a rewrite of the first part of the blessing from Melchizedek. "That I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.'"
Because it's taking glory away from God.
Yeah.
It's pointing glory back to the king of Sodom.
Well, and it's also this reality that if the king of Sodom ends up giving something to Abram, the king of Sodom will ever say, "Yeah, that Abram guy, that guy that now is doing really, really, really well, I did that. That's all me."
It's like one of those sketchy managers at retail when they're like, "See that guy?
Yeah, see that guy that got promoted a few times?
Yeah, I did that.
I printed. He's my apprentice.
He's the CEO. Yeah, I basically made him the CEO.
Yeah, exactly. So Abram doesn't want to be even closely associated with this guy, which is really good.
Yeah,
right.
It seems wise.
Yeah.
Did Abram know how the king of Sodom was before this?
Oh, I totally think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally think so.
I mean, probably if he was at war with all these other kingdoms.
Yeah. Well, and we can even see obviously Lot got shuffled in with all that crap because he was in Sodom. And we see the thing before now, the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Yeah. And so it seems that that's the author's note that's trying to tell you this. Yeah. But it was probably fairly observable that these people were not just like, oh, we're like okay people, but they were like wicked, like bad people. Yeah. Like that was the same phrasing that they used for the people when, like the people pre-flood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so
How they're having interactions with the daughters of man.
that's in Sodom. That's in Sodom.
What?
But that's in Genesis like 20-ish.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But
See, timelines are so hard.
dude,
for
what's
me,
going on, man?
I don't know.
But
It's tough.
hey, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's just a little jumbled around. It's a little scrambled. But yeah, but we see that the people that were wicked, it's the same language. And so in the same way that Noah, right, was sort of separated from the wicked people and he chose to follow Yahweh. We see this in the same sense that Abram is separating himself from the people who are wicked, and that he's actually calling upon the name of the Lord instead. And so he's associating himself with the priest of God Most High.
Way to go, Abram.
Yeah,
Pat on the back for you, man. That's
this is the beauty of seeing a character who ebbs and flows, and currently he's on an upward trajectory.
That's good. He's riding the wave.
Yeah, and so we're seeing an example of what it means to follow Yahweh well. Now, obviously, we might not be in a situation where a king of a wicked country comes up to us and says, "Hey, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself." Like, we definitely won't come up to that situation, but we see like tactile moments where someone is following Yahweh well.
Yeah.
And we see moments where someone doesn't.
Yeah.
Where he doesn't follow Yahweh well. But we get to kind of contrast these two. So
we're getting a rich character arc of Abram here.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And so he basically just ends with saying, "I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me."
Is he referring to what the young men had eaten from Melchizedek's blessing, the bread and the wine? Or is
No, I think it's more just talking essentially about the fact that he's not going to take anything but what has already been taken, like his army.
Yeah.
They had to eat.
Yeah.
And so they probably maybe got something from the king of Sodom or from someone else.
Went through the drive-thru.
Yeah, exactly. And so their whole army, they ate. And so Abram's like, well, that's all we'll pretty much take, is the things that we can't give back. Right?
That'd be insulting.
Yeah, we cannot give this back, so we'll just keep this. But that's pretty much what we see. And so Abram, he's doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can. We'll see if I have a response.
The last sentence here of 24.
Uh-oh, yeah.
Uh-oh. Great start. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. Are these other kingdoms? Or are these people?
You know, my guess is these might have been people who helped Abram.
Okay.
Right, we see Mamre specifically.
Yeah, that sounds
Abram
familiar.
hangs out by the oaks of Mamre.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm like, why does that name sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my guess is that these were people that were on Abram's side, and that if they were to get some kind of share for helping him, that was what they got. And so
I wonder if that was like a nice move on Abram's part, or if that was somehow potentially bad for them. Just
I don't
given
necessarily. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. That's
yeah.
okay. We can leave that there. We'll put a pin in that. I was just curious.
No, that's interesting. I mean, that's something for the listener to do some research on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the big point here is that Abram is not willing to elevate himself. Right?
Yeah.
He just goes in, he wins this battle against all these kings. What should come from that? Well, it should be like him getting all this stuff, people throwing like money and everything at him. But it ends with him being blessed by a priest who kind of shows up and leaves. And then him giving away 10% of what he had and refusing to get anything else. And so you're like, oh, like Abram is actually refusing to elevate himself.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately, I think, the biggest focus on this sort of second part of this section, is that Abram is not willing to at all take any real credit for himself, but to reflect it all on Yahweh.
I guess him trying to get rid of his wife twice really humbled things. You're calling his wife his sister. Just gave him perspective.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, but he does it again. So
God's working in
Yeah.
his heart. That's all we know.
yeah. So, so that's what we got with Genesis 14. It's fascinating, and then our next 2 episodes we'll sort of look into a little bit more on who this Melchizedek character is and how the biblical authors take this character and sort of run with it a little bit.
Nice. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.